Your hand will hold me still, even when my world is shaking. Your hand will hold me still. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made.
Hello and welcome to our Tuesday night theology chat with Chumpy. What we do on Tuesday nights is I go through and try and pull out some of the theological stuff from Pastor Melissa's sermon on Sunday, try to define some terms, try and answer some questions that come up from the sermons on Sunday. So we do this every week, and if you have a question from the sermon, you can let Pastor Melissa or myself know on Sunday, or you can send us a message later. Or if you remember something tonight, you can post that in the comments, and then I will try and talk about that and address that if I can. If I can't, then I will do a little research and try and get back to you as soon as I can. So that's what we do on Tuesday nights. So here we are. Let's jump in. This past week, Pastor Melissa talked about she kind of went in, she started with this thing that somebody had made a comment to her, well, that doesn't love conquer all, and that was kind of the jumping point. And she went into a passage in, I'm going to give it a little bit of review, partly because our live stream wasn't working Sunday morning, so just to get you up to speed if you missed that somehow. But she went into John chapter 3, the book of John, and there's a section in there where Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and he makes a reference in that chapter when he's talking to Nicodemus. He says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. Okay, now the assumption here is that you understand and you know the backstory to this. The writer of John is assuming that you have this backstory. So just to bring you up to speed, if you don't have that information readily available in the back of your mind, Moses was the guy that led the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt, and one of the things that happened in that Exodus was that, and she read this passage later on, so we went over that, but there were poisonous snakes that got into the camp of the Israelites. And it says that God allowed this to happen, and people were getting bit and dying from these poisonous snakes. I'm sorry, let me correct myself. Venomous snakes. Poison you get by eating it. Venom you get by getting bitten. My bad. So there were these venomous snakes in the camp, and people were dying because they got bit. So one of the what happened was God told Moses, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to make this staff that has this snake on it, and then you hold it up and put it in the center of camp. And when somebody gets bit, you have to turn, and they need to turn and look at that snake on the pole, and they'll be healed. And so her point was, or Jesus's point, I should say, not Melissa's. I'm a little scattered tonight, sorry. Just like that snake was lifted up on a pole, and when people turned to it, they were healed. The same way, Jesus is going to be lifted up on a pole, He's going to be crucified on a cross. And when people look to him, they will be healed and saved. Okay? That was the comparison that Jesus was making there. And Nicodemus, the guy he was talking to, would have like instantly known what he was talking about, would have made that connection. And so that's why we wanted to kind of hit both of these here. Jesus is talking about like a foundational story, the Exodus, in the history of Israel. And so this is something that everybody at the time would have known about and had that background. Now, what this has to do with what she was talking about, Pastor Melissa was talking about, was she was talking about this idea of people's love, this idea of our love conquering all. Her point was that we can't love someone into being healed, into being saved, into, or out of, I should say, addiction. We can't love them out of that. All right? Only God's love changes people. Okay? Now I was having a conversation with somebody this weekend, and it's like that's something that, you know, as a pastor, I want to be able to guide people into transformation. I feel like it's my responsibility to help guide them into transformation. But I need to constantly remind myself, I can't make that change for them. I can't make that decision to change. That's something that they need to do, and that's something that God needs to work on them through and love them into. Okay, that's not something that I can do. And that's something I need to constantly remind myself. And I think all of us need to be able to remind ourselves every so often, you know, we love people because that's what we're made to do, but we don't do that so that we can get a desired result. Does that make sense? We love them because that's what we do, not I love them so that they'll change. I think that makes sense. So, theologically, a couple of things I want to point out from this sermon on Sunday. One is the sovereignty of God. We talked about this a little while back. Well, the sovereignty of God, what is the sovereignty of God? Sovereignty is that God is in charge of, He's over everything. Okay? He is the final authority. And so, with that in mind, He is the authority. He could say, you're going to change, period. Poof, make it happen. But He doesn't do that. And that's where it gets a little sticky sometimes, because God is sovereign. He is all powerful. He is all almighty. But at the same time, does God always get what He wants? No. That's the answer, is no. I mean, you look all through the Bible, there's stories one after another of God not getting what He wants. Okay, you go to the very beginning, Adam and Eve. He puts them in this garden with everything they could possibly want. And He says, okay, this one tree is what I don't want you to eat. All right? You have one job. Don't do this. And God doesn't get what He wants there. They go and they eat the fruit anyway. And humanity is fallen into sin. You look at the story of Israel. Over and over and over. If you read the Old Testament, you could retitle the Old Testament the story of Israel doing everything wrong and then doing it again. It's just a constant. And we were reading through the Old Testament in Bible study, and it's like it's like you would start into a story and you're like, okay, I see where this is going to be going. Israel's going to start off good, and then they're going to go and do everything wrong. They're going to do the exact thing that God told them not to do, and then they'll be sorry, and then they'll start off good, and then they'll do everything that God told them not to do. It's like this repeating cycle. And so, does God get what He wants there? No. He doesn't, because Israel constantly was deciding to do things the way they wanted to do it. And so when we talk about the sovereignty of God, God is over all, but there's this element of he doesn't always get what he wants. And the reason why is because he's given us free will. We talk about this a lot because we are responsible for our actions and for what we do and what we say and what we think. We are responsible for that. Okay? He's given us the free will to decide things for ourselves. Okay? So he tells us, okay, I want you to love your neighbor. I want you to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, we're not robots, and we don't instantly start doing that like we're a computer program. That's not the way it works. He gives us this command. This is how I want you to be. But then it's our decision to act on that. And so that's free will. Now, to take that, we're going to jump into another point of theology here in a second. But he even gives us free will to decide whether or not we are going to follow him at all. Okay? He is God. He is almighty. He is all-powerful. He is the ultimate authority. But he gives us the choice to say, yeah, I don't want anything to do with you. And so, while he is the ultimate authority, that free will results in a lot of this world not being the way that God intended it. Okay, we've talked about this multiple times. This world, a lot of what is going on in this world that isn't right is a result of us doing things the way that we want, us being humanity, doing the way that we want instead of following what God has told us that he wants for us. And so he even gives us that choice of saying, no, I don't want to follow you. I don't want to be with you. I don't want to have a relationship with you, God. Okay? Now, to get into a theological point here, there is a group or a thought, a stream of thought in Christian theology that believes that the people who are going to accept God are the people that God chooses out of the pool of people. All right, and this is a group of people that believe in what we would call predestination. In other words, these people were predetermined that they are going to accept God. Okay, we do not subscribe to that line of thought because he gives us free will. He gives us a will to choose, and so we believe that he actually means that. And so we have the choice to say, okay, I'm going to follow God or I'm not going to follow God. There is a strong predestination bent, maybe? Is that a way to put it? In what we call Calvinism. These are people that follow the teachings of John Calvin, who was a contemporary with John Wesley, but not in our kind of branch of the Christian tree. So we follow the teachings of John Wesley, who Wesley was big on free will and our ability to determine what we do, but then also our responsibility for what we do and what we say and what we think. And so that's where we stand on that. We have free will to make choices for ourselves, including to the point of saying, no, I don't want to have anything to do with you, God. But we are responsible for those choices. And ultimately, I'm not going to go real deep into this, but like when we talk about hell, ultimately that is really the ultimate expression of our free will. Like if we tell God, I don't want to have anything to do with you, well, being completely cut off from God is literally God giving us what we want. Okay? A lot of times, if you look back through the Old Testament stories, a lot of times you'll see stories of God giving the people what they want, knowing full well that it's not what's best for them. And then the story unfolds and you realize as you read on, oh yeah, that was bad. They they should have just listened to God in the first place. But then as the story goes on, you learn that. And I think this is kind of the ultimate expression of that, where if we tell God, like, we don't want anything to do with you, and he gives it to us, well, that's essentially what hell is, being completely cut off from the source of life, the source of everything that is life. You no longer have access to. And so what that looks like, and all the details of that, I'm not going to get into that. That's a lot of times I don't think that's productive. But all that to say that God gives us a choice to say, am I going to follow him or am I not going to follow him? And then the responsibilities of those choices fall on us. And so that's where our responsibility falls in on that. Now, what Melissa was saying was that just like this snake that Moses was raising up in the wilderness, it's our responsibility to look to that snake. Okay? God gives us a lot of opportunities for healing, for transformation, for walking in the way that he has for us. He provides all kinds of opportunities for us to get on board with that. But it doesn't just happen. It requires us to say, yes, okay, I'm going to follow you now. I'm going to take advantage of these opportunities that you've given me. Just like turning to look at the snake. If you got bit by a venomous snake, we have to turn to God and follow where he's leading on these opportunities. All right? And so that's kind of the tie-in there, because we've been given the free will, so we need to exercise that and decide to follow God. The tie-in that she was making to addiction is you can't love someone out of addiction. That is a decision that they need to make for themselves, and until they decide that for themselves, it's not going to happen, because it's kind of similar to saying God just deciding for someone that they're going to come to God. It kind of takes their free will out of it. With addiction, however, it's not going to happen until they make that decision for themselves. And so that's where she was going with that. So that's kind of all I had for this week. There wasn't a whole lot to dive too deep into. But we are starting a series this week. Well, this was kind of the transition sermon. Next week, we're going to be starting the story of Moses and then going through at least part of the Exodus. I don't remember if we're going the whole way through before Advent starts. But we're doing Moses and the Exodus. And so we'll have a bunch of stuff probably to talk about over the next few weeks with that. So I will see you next week. Bye-bye.